Let's see if we can explode something I have hit and kicked and pushed and mentioned here and there on several occasions. But by now you should be able to fatten it up somewhat by your own receptors as soon as you hear it, with a slight twist to it, a slight expanded twist. And it goes like this. Got to have an arpeggio. That there are three kinds of talk. And to be really down home and back into the lab with it, let us now refer to them as motor talk, limbic talk, and cortical talk. Having to do with, quite truthfully, but I'm not trying to take off the blush and the allure of any of you thinking all this has got to be so mystical and weird that it will not fit in with everyday affairs. See, that's wrong. It's everyday affairs fits in with this. That's why everyday affairs are flawed. That's why they're only partial. Consider the loop itself of the human nervous system. And of course will be referring back to, I say of course, perhaps that will become what? Obvious. But the loop having a place, and there's nowhere to draw it but in a two-dimensional drawing, here in a three-dimensional milieu, I'll have to put it somewhere that we have. Oh, you want to do it the easy way? And draw the line there and say, there's the nonverbal part, and there's the verbal part. So we always end up, or I do, drawing the verbal part somewhere on top. Within this, and now there's definitely nowhere to draw it, and yet here I go, because all of this is incorrect. You would have motor talk. Now I'm just going to say, I'll just kind of close my eyes and go motor talk somewhere like in there. And I'll just close my eyes again and say that limbic talk is somewhere like in there. And for a final time, which is all I can stand, I get scared. It's like, does that show up? Well, cheap technology. Here would be like cortical talk, all right? But now to very specifics that I believe that some of you should be able to hear for the first time. Because this has to do quite literally with the physiology of the human organism, including that which ordinary dualists, two-eyed monsters, two-eyed intellects are inclined to refer to as, inside the physiology of man, that is, to refer to as being the division between, all right, man's physiology, but are you going to include man's psychology? And by now you all know our great theme song, and that is, could I have another arpeggio? We'll put the music, is man ain't got no psychology. Those of you that don't know the song, I was going to print it up and hand it out later. Of course, there is this. Only those have a psychology who think they do. And so you've always got your way out. It's a variation of having a soul, of people believing that they have a Christian or a Jewish or an eternal, a Hindu. You got to be something to have a soul, people think. So the only ones who have a soul are those who think they do. But I let Kyroots put that one on you some months back, and that is open. Anybody who's really interested in it is open to great further exploration that I didn't point out. That which should be obvious once you realize what's not obvious in there. I could, to make it a little more obvious and really get off the initial subject, is only those have a soul pre-death who believe they do. Now, is that not obvious? When I don't take it as simply obvious, because you can say, wait a minute, you mean anybody that's a heathen, anybody that believes that there is no afterlife doesn't have a soul because they don't believe there's a soul. All right. But you're not going to stop there. Only those who believe they have a soul have got a soul. Only those who believe they have a psychology have a psychology. They have something, but they call it a psychology. And they separate it from the physiology. But we're not going to do that any longer, are we? So I refer you to three kinds of talk. The motor talk. And this exists in everyone who has language extant working in their nervous system, which includes all of you people, even you people getting us on tape. Even though you're watching a monitor somewhere that vaguely resembles perhaps a television set, you still are literate enough or you wouldn't be watching it. Of course, you people there in the tape viewing areas, you might check around. There could be somebody that came in and died. They may not be actually watching it. But anyone else who is watching it or listening, you do have a functioning language. That is, you do have a complete loop. You do have a verbal area in your nervous system. So all of this that I have drawn exists in each person. It exists in humanity. Now, motor talk. Motor talk is concerned almost exclusively with the world of action. Motor talk. It talks about what it has done. It talks about sometimes what others have done, which is a kind of form of gossip. But it is one version, it is a lower level of gossip, and I'll get into where the limbic system engages in a kind of gossip, but on a different level. Motor talk is concerned almost exclusively with primary activities. Now everyone chew on all that for a second. The motor talk is primarily about the world of action. Motor talk talks about what it has done. It being whatever you see fit. It, the person doing the talking. It being that aspect of the person doing the talking at that moment, if it indeed is the motor talk. And it can talk about what others have done. The limbic talk. It talks to a great extent about what has happened to it, with a big emphasis on what bad, unprofitable, untoward has happened to it. Not what it's done, but what happened to it. It will engage in a kind of talk about what has happened to other people and what they've done. But it is now on the basis of the gossip, is more on the basis not of what other people have done, there would be some action-oriented, some action goal-definable activity. That yes, my uncle ran a 3-minute, 52-second mile. It would be more like, yeah, my uncle entered a contest, and while he was running, he fell and broke his leg. Yep. The limbic system talks more about that. And if it was going to talk about the kind of things it has done, as opposed to the motor talk, would be about, well, I built myself a new patio since I saw you last. The limbic would say, I tried to build a patio and I broke my thumb. That it's not actually what I've done, it's what happened to me. I built the patio, and it stayed, it stood up, and suddenly here comes, out of the woodwork, out of the woods, here comes a guy from the county zoning and told me I was going to tear it down. Can you believe that kind of crap? The limbic system starts moving very strongly into secondary areas. Its main conversation is about secondary concerns and activities. Now, having said that, I'll back up and give you the more direct version, which I didn't do it to start with on purpose. That is, it begins to be a kind of combination, but I didn't want to tell you so that you'd start thinking, well, it's 50% this or 50% that. It can talk about, and will talk about, primary activities, but they've always got a secondary, or generally they do, a secondary spin. That is, all right, back to motor talk. Now, so it was, in the main, would be concerned with primary activities. That it would be talking about, boy, I ate too much last night. Or I ate too much for dinner today. I don't know whether I can go back to work. I feel like laying down and taking a nap. The limbic system, if it was going to comment, would be more inclined not to just talk about the food itself. It'd like, I guess I ate too much, but I'm not sure it's just the quantity. I believe I got food poisoning. I think that sandwich I bought back there at that market, I never have trusted that market. That woman's always been insulting and real sloppy looking, and I bet she doesn't keep those sandwiches chilled properly. I bet I'm going to be sick. I was real sick one time. I ate an egg salad sandwich last year. What I want you to see, perhaps it'll clear up a little bit when I hit the cortical talk, but the limbic system will start off as a basis in primary activities, such as I built a patio. But if it's a limbic system talking, you can count, like waiting for Henny Youngman or for Jackie Leonard to come in with the timing to say, I built myself a patio. And if you knew it was a limbic system talking, you can go 1, 2, 3. And they'll say, and the damn thing collapsed. And it broke my foot. You can count it. Well, last night, I bought a new barbecue thing, and I invited some friends over, and we started. It was the first time I'd ever done it, and I decided to cook out. You go 1, 2. You can say, and the thing blew up and burned down my house. Cortical talk. Perhaps it is clear enough to some of you now, but it's so non-specific in a 3D sense is why I hated to say that it was half and half, because that would be the easy way to say that the motor system talks in the main about primary areas. The cortical system in the main talks about secondary stuff, and the good old limbic system there in the middle talks about half and half. But see, it's not that way. Because nothing's that way. Anything that you say is that way, whatever we're talking about, ain't that way. Well, you couldn't say it was that way. And it's especially not that way if somebody can say it's that way, and you fall back to old intelligence and go, oh yeah, I can see that. It's really not that way. What it is you're that way. There's no reason you went, oh yeah, that's self-evident. That's very clear. But on back, if I go ahead now to the cortical talk, perhaps even in retrospect, it'll make a little more non-specific sense. Cortical talk is involved in the main in the world of ideas and possibilities. Not the world of action, not the world of what has happened to me, but the world of ideas and possibilities. And it is further concerned with what it thinks. It will talk about that. It will talk about ideas, theoretical ideas, ideas that seem to be someone else's ideas. They can discuss it. Then they can discuss possibilities. They can theorize. They can make up fantastic technological changes. They can dream. In the world of ideas and possibilities, and the talk very often concerns itself, in the right circumstance, with the cortical talk, talking about what it thinks. The limbic system about what it feels. The motor system more about what it has done in the world of action in general. From the view of those of you who recall it and have some grasp of the flawed yet worthwhile nature of the time being of me dividing activities up into primary and secondary, and the primary being at the very minimal. The way to start with, if anytime you're having trouble, is what would it take to keep you minimally alive? and we're looking at the protection of what would seem to be just the body itself. Food, shelter, water, and humanity in general, of course, sex. And then anything beyond that is being secondary at the crudest level. But then when it gets into the more complex area and you're freed from the limitations of that old kind of intelligence, you realize that to be a full functioning modern human, the secondary activities are in a sense a new level of primary activities, because you would not be a fully employed, you would not be fulfilling your rightful position, whatever it is, in life's employment, were you not operating and being concerned with secondary stuff. So trying to keep that in mind, then let me point out that the cortical talk is in the main about secondary stuff. Now, from a combined view, could you begin to see that this situation, looked at from an ordinary view, could be seen as being the pilings for the Tower of Babel? It is back to why, from some views, if you wanted to kind of ad hoc why people seem to be unable to communicate. That's not what's going on, you remember. What's going on is what's going on. What's going on is correct. It is a transfer of energy. It is a churning up of everyone's verbal and nonverbal systems. But from certain views, out in the city, men are continually driven to talk about the failure to communicate, the difficulty to communicate. Why, if you have a football player and a painter and an atomic physicist, and you sit them all three down and give them some coffee or a couple of drinks, and you try to get them to discuss almost anything, let them discuss sports, let them discuss post-impressionistic painting, let them discuss the possibilities of cold fusion, you know, whatever it is, somewhere within that, those three people sit there, and it'll be just a small version of the Tower of Babel. And you think, why? Why? There is the underpinnings, there is the reality of the Tower of Babel story inside of each person. Were it not, there would be no need for psychiatry. Were it not, there would be no need, there would be no apparent existence even of a dialogue. There would never be any uncertainty, there wouldn't be any ambiguity in you, although it comes out in people who believe they have a psychology. It comes out in their psychology in ways that they believe that I am still being plagued by unconscious traumas and blah blah. You all know the rest of that song. But there is built in inherently inside of the human system this sort of situation that you have three different kinds of talk. There is within each person, as you should already be able to see, there would seem to be a preponderance of dependence on one form of talk or the other. There might be two that seem to split up most of the work. But what you're involved with, it seems to be a person's type, a person's personality type in general. You can tie it to, once you begin to see it, what talk seems to predominate from them. Is it their motor talk talking primarily, not just overtly, but even to them? Is it their limbic talk talking? Is it their cortical talk talking? And it becomes easy to see. We've been through enough of this, but people whose, for instance, cortical talk is almost exclusively in charge. You can see them walking down the street 50 feet away from the rear, and you can see the guy walk, and I can tell you, oh, you should be able to. Well, there's one thing for sure, his motor talk ain't talking. I mean, it may be mumbling somewhere like, God damn, are you ungraceful? Of course, if he's grown, it's not anymore. If you point that out to the guy, he'd say, well, you know what, you're onto something. That's the kind of subconscious stuff I think is going on with me, and it does make me clumsy because sometimes I blah, 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 going nowhere. But you can look and see, definitely, or got to make up other possibilities. You can see people doing something else. You can see people try to draw a little something, a circle or something, if you know how, if you can spot talk, and you realize that you could spend the rest of your life furnishing, not just you, but somebody else perhaps, furnishing them lessons in art and sketching, and the person will never draw any better. But you could put on a JB or a good Handel small symphony and start kind of shaking your head and see somebody try to pat their foot along, and you could spot it if you know how to do it and realize that you could spend the rest of your life, and whatever it took, with whips and chains and metronomes the size of small cars, and this person's sense of rhythm will never improve. The talk people have is the talk they're going to stay with. It is old world intelligence, but inside of each person you have these three talks going on inside of each institution, every organization, every tribe of humanity, and in the organism of humanity itself, you now have the three talks going on, and they do not take turns. And when I say that you can see from a 3D view, remember that there seems would obviously be a predominance of dependence on one of the talks in most people, at least at any given time. If you had somebody who can talk, has a good conversation, has a good vocabulary, let us say with the motor and the cortical talk, they would still find themselves in conflict. They would still believe that something was amiss inside their own internal conversations with themselves, and they wouldn't know why, but it would be that even though that would seem to be not just the predominant dependence on one, you got the predominant dependence on two. They may split up the work, and you're not a lot better off. The person may, this is of no consequence, that kind of person may live a more interesting life. They may be able to pursue more hobbies, maybe, maybe not. But it is not per se going to make any great difference with the person. Try another paragraph. See if I can pull some of you a little further with this, because as I said, this on the surface I have hit before, but you should be able, some of you by now, to find it fresh. But now consider that via talk, inside of the individual and otherwise, via talk, the simple can be made more complex, and the complex can be rendered foolish and irrelevant. This is not the normal description of the activities of the human tongue in the city, but if you can begin to see that, I would suggest to you again that you may find yourself going, that sure is obvious once you see it. And once you see it, everything that everyone else, including my own system, used to say was obvious and didn't explain anything is a waste of time. Because inside of your system and then between people, for the needs of life itself, just by talk, and if you can refine it and begin to see the interplay within you between the three kinds of talk, or between two people, and that one talk is taking place in one person and the other one is talking, that is apparently listening, but is talking to themselves in another talk, then that which from one of the views started out as simple, or even if you were an outside observer and I said, watch this and tell me what the guy is about to say, is it a simple matter or a more complex matter? You were staying behind a bush or a door and you listened, and one guy said blah 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 blah, and you would say, well, that's fairly simple. The area, I know what he's talking about. Maybe it's not anything technical, but just ordinary human affair. And the guy started about, well, something happened to me in my love life. Something happened to me between me and my children. And he goes, blah, 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 blah. And you say, well, that's fairly simple. I'm familiar with that. And then he goes, blah, 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 blah. And it's like some kind of, tremendous, out of the guy's mouth, it becomes a form of, perhaps some kind of new definition of rococo. And you listened and you said, well, at first it was a simple matter and now it has been rendered complex. But now in the city, this is known, this is commented on, not in the way in which I'm doing it, of course, and they're only seeing a partial view of it. So when it is noticed in the city, it is always in a pejorative sense. That is, wait a minute, You took a matter that was fairly simple and straightforward, and my God, now, I don't know what's happening inside of your brain or your mind, but you have just turned the whole mess. It was a simple thing until I started listening to you talk about it. That's part of your problem right there, sir. You've made the whole thing into too big of a deal. Think about it a second. I said it was second paragraph. It's the talk. It's one of the talkers was either talking or commenting or noticing somebody else talking, and it started, and it was a nice simple affair. That is, the world of action. The guy said, I came home and caught my son. I came home early and caught my son smoking pot. Motor talk, here's that. All right, we got it's a pretty straightforward situation, pretty simple. And so it continues to listen. Are we talking about inside one person or otherwise? I don't know. Figure it out. So, motor talk, here's the situation. And the guy describing it, the talk describing, came home and caught my son smoking pot there in the house. Motor talk goes on it. Whoever's talking, I'm not going to tell you yet. It was a comma there. I was so upset. At first I considered some of the things I might do, but then I realized I'd been reading an article recently, in fact several articles in the last couple of months, regarding the kind of pressures that seems to be more prevalent in today's teenage lifestyles, and I even considered some of the folly in which I engaged in when I was younger, although vis-a-vis at that time it was more to do with the drug alcohol. And it goes on, and Motor Talk was listening and thinking, well, it was fairly simple. If anybody had asked me, I would have gone in and either told my kid don't do that again, or I'd have hit him in the nose, or I'd have thrown him out of the house, or else I'd have said, hey, if that's pretty good stuff, roll me up one. But at any rate, what is this? You came and you told me the problem. You came home and caught your son smoking pot, and I could tell you didn't like it, the way you put it. I can dig that. But now it's been 5 minutes more, and I don't know what the hell you're talking about. I mean, I know you're still talking about the situation, but Jesus, it was fairly simple. You have rendered it complex. Now, that would not be the term. They would say you have rendered it just almost unbelievably complex. You've gone so far afield, no wonder you kind of intellectuals. Oh, I almost gave it away. That the Motor Talk, let us say just for instance, that perhaps it was, let's say more of a cortical talk describing the situation. But the Motor Talk, as far as it's concerned, you have verbally rendered this so complex that I don't know what to do with it. Contrarily, as is always the possible case in the 3D world, you could take a situation that was fairly complex and simply by talk render it into pearls in the mud. If I may requote the great Western Bible. But it can render that which was complex, not just render it simple, but now see, in the city again. Once I describe this a little more, some of you should be able to jump ahead right quick and even get a grasp, a hint of what I'm about to say. But before I get there, in the city they have some knowledge of this under ordinary conditions, that people take something complex, something that's rather arcane, and just by talking about it, you can make it more simple. But again, it is oftentimes done in a negative observation. That is, well, you're trying to simplify this situation. Now, this is more complex. I mean, you people, for instance, one of the talks say this whole situation about abortion or capital punishment. We have people out here marching on one side of the prison over here. Let's go to capital punishment. They're fixing to execute a guy next week. All right, over here, we got these people marching. The capital punishment is a crime against God, a crime against nature, a crime against man. And over here we got people carrying signs, fry the bastard, fry him. At least he won't kill again. Capital punishment works this way, colon, whoever we fry, we don't have to fry twice. All right, one of the talks can look at that and say, wait a minute. The whole notion of capital punishment, they have been wrestling with this all the way in the Western world from notices in the Old Testament. The Greeks, the Babylonians, the Fig Newtons, people are worried about this. And for you people to try and bring it down to where it's simply a matter of marching with a slogan, you have rendered something. I mean, you've made it an obscene joke, not a funny joke. You people saying, "Fire the bastard." You have taken something very complex that we've yet to be able to work out. We don't have enough statistical evidence to actually prove whether having capital punishment in our judicial books actually deters serious crime. We do not know. It's demeaning. You've made the argument irrelevant. You've made it foolish to go out there and carry a sign saying, "Fire the bastard." Don't do that. Now, they know it in that sense, but not in the sense I'm telling you. Because in the sense I'm telling you, it's not demeaning. It's not a pejorative observation. It is, I go back to what I told you I started in the second paragraph, that via talk you can take that which is simple and make it complex. Now try and forget the examples I used there about finding your son smoking pot or people marching for or against capital punishment. Now get back to the general, more complex, at least a 5 or 4-dimensional aspect of life's health and growth. You have the situation continually that no one notices where something, and I'm just having to jump in again, artificial in the midst of reality, in the midst of the blank act, whichever act. And to say that here is something that was simple compared to what is about to happen to it. It's not simple per se. We're having to describe it simple ad hoc insofar as what we're about to compare it to. That it was simple, but simply by talk, by those involved. And by involved, it could be somebody who read about it 3 days after it happened on the other side of the world and turned to their wife and say, "Can you believe that guy dies, the leader of that country, and you got 1 million people out there beating on their head hollering, 'Mo, our great leader's gone,' and 520 people got killed out there rushing to see his body." Dear, can you believe that kind of insanity takes place in life? That could happen 3 or 4 days after whatever the situation was. The other side of the world, it only happened within 20 seconds, but it took something that was simple from one view, and at least with 2 people, or at least 1.5. There was 2 talkers. There was the talker and then the talk that was listening, that is his wife. Even she doesn't comment, except maybe, "Yes, dear," "Certainly, dear." But they have made it more complex. That is, if he had just read it and not made any comment, it would have stayed where it was, at whatever level it was. Mere talk. This is the further defense of talk. In a silly way, in a cute way. That mere talk can take that which is simple and make it more complex. For life's purposes, it can churn up people. It can churn up energy. It can raise the temperature of potential energy. It can get work done that was only potential work at that time simply verbally by somebody just commenting, just for 10 seconds. Just by even, I would suggest to you, expletives. Of just somebody read something and go, "Jesus!" You made it a little more complex. You looked at something you couldn't believe. I went, "God damn!" It's kind of an aside, if any of you would like to consider why expletives have so been condemned. Of course, they're always condemned that it's on the basis of something, that you shouldn't curse. Shouldn't curse God. In that case, how does, other stuff like, "Shit!" Why is it that humanity doesn't seem to like these one-word attempts to, you may say it, to make something more, or maybe it's to make it more, but to try and do it with one word, I don't want to talk about it. Leave something to your imagination. Leave something for you to figure out. But just by talk, that which is simple can be made more complex, and that which was more complex compared to what we're about to compare it to, that you'll observe, mere talk can take something and turn it foolishly, more simplistically, even render it in that little condition. Maybe just be one person looking at it and going, "Jesus, give me a break." Have rendered it more simplistic and to them irrelevant. Why do they bother putting that kind of news in the paper? Who cares? It was still a transfer of energy, but as far as the participant, as far as the voice talking, it took that which was more complex and went, let me be a judge. I'll settle that kind of crap. They're wasting their time worried about that. Turn the page and go on. That is, turn the page, think of something else. You're on to the next page. While I'm mentioning, I'll play like I just thought of this. Why do I worry about dramatics? Because I don't pull them off anyway, do I? As long as we're talking about this, about 3 kinds of talk, see if you can push yourself over here. What if, now I've asked one version of this before now, but what if the dialogue that seems to be your inner theater, that seems to be your inner life, seems to be you as a complete, full functioning human being in that great corporation and army of those staying around to be killed, doing their job, doing their duty. This dialogue, what if it is not only life's dialogue to itself through man, but what if, no, never mind that what if. See if you can see this. See if you can consider the possibility that instead of a dialogue taking place, there is a trialog taking place. And it goes like this. Hit it, maestro. That there are 3. See, when I brought this out a few months before, I pointed out that the dialogue inside of you, first time I presented it rhetorical, if you recall, I said, what if the dialogue, could you see that the possibility that the dialogue in you is involved with 2 specific things? And I even asked, is it possible that's why there is a dialogue? That one of the voices seemed to always be talking about action, and the other one's always talking about thinking of action, the planning. Then I asked you a little bit later, could you conceive of the possibility that that's what life is doing on a larger level through man? We got to turn the tape over now. Ask you about whether you can see the possibility of a trialogue. Let's add one to it. Could you conceive of there being 3 living possibilities going on within the large dialogue of life and within your dialogue, of it actually being 3, and it would go like this in a trialogue. There'd be one voice that would seem to be in charge of doing, directing action, and there would seem to be a voice, of course, apparently in charge of thinking of doing. How about the 3rd one? If it was a trialogue, the voice that's in charge of worrying about the possible consequences. Does that even sound at all familiar? With limbic talk, more emotional people, as they call them in the city, I guess. I don't like to call anybody anything that they're called in the city, except Siegfried. If they named him that, I'm going to continue to call him that. That and Bubba. Could you see, could you neuralize any possibility that what would seem to be the limbic talk, the kind of human emotional talk, could almost fit into the possibility? See, the other 2 you could cover somewhere, could you not? I assume you've already put that together. That you could look at one of the other 2 voices, the 2 talks I already mentioned, is one apparently being directly in charge of action, of doing. And another voice in charge of, more in charge of, planning, that is thinking of doing. And then there's one that's not normally identified. I've always been, of late, referring to this dialogue. But do you not spot? Here, spot. That there would seem to be this voice somewhere that's in charge of worrying about the possible consequences of doing or not doing, which is the same thing. Whereas the other two, do you spot that the other two would apparently need some help? That if you've got a voice, the way life operates, the way that you operate, when you're just operating at some minimal efficiency, just getting by, flowing through life, that the voice in charge, the talk in charge of doing, when it operates, you just finally got to do, or you would never get anything done. There's got to be that lag between thinking of doing and doing, the lag being a gap. There has to be what seems to be a clear embarkation. There has to be apparently a frontier between. That is, that the doing voice finally says, if it had to, all right, enough. You know, Jesus, let's do it even if we blow it. No, I don't hear more. It's time to do it, and you just do it. Maybe it falls down, maybe it doesn't work right, but the voice in charge of that does not really go back and suffer over it. All of you, and everyone's done this, whether you can remember or not, everyone has finally reached the point of doing something, and they planned, they thought, and they tried to read a book, or for whatever reason you thought at the time it's getting so late, the deadline's pressing on me, I'm just getting sick of fooling with it, I'm just going ahead and try it. And you try it and it doesn't work. The one of you, the voice in a kind of trialog, the energy running through life that finally just makes somebody do, to take action. And they'll say, well, I don't think we've got enough information. I don't know. I still don't feel satisfied with Jesus. And you go do it. And sure enough, you do it, and it collapses. The talk, the force that finally did it, does not really suffer over it falling down. The voice planning. Do I have to do that? Well, evidently I am. The voice who did it. Now I'm going to put it, of course, it sounds like psychological terms, but you people should know better. It has to do with different kinds of energy. But the voice that finally did it was like driven by life to know that, well, the time's come, we got to do something, and I'm taking into consideration, listening to some of the other voices, that we may not have enough information, but I'm not going to stay around here forever. It's getting late and I got to eat or I'm going to bed. If we're going to do it, I'm going to do it now. But it's like that it had information that we don't have enough details. We probably cannot do this. I don't know exactly how you tell you to do it. Could be true, I'm going to do it. Then when it falls down, that voice per se, that voice individually, does not take responsibility because it knew. It had heard the message that we may not have enough information. So, you're right. I did the best I could with information. Another voice, may I suggest the CT, the cortical voice. The thing falls down. It does not take any great personal responsibility because it says, as it were, well, I knew we didn't have enough information. Now, I'm not surprised, but I knew. I said so. Somebody heard me. I know I heard me. I said, wait a minute, we still don't have enough information, but somebody else went, come on, I'm going to bed, we're going to do it now, forget it. But I told you we didn't. And it may be magnanimous enough to say, well, I hate to lay blame, and perhaps we can learn something from it, but it will not take full responsibility because it said. I'm not sure that we know what we're doing. So you're left. Who's going to suffer over this? Do you not begin to see the need now, after all this time of me describing dialogues, that just, not because I made up this whole scenario, but because this is the reality in your existence, that there seems to be this other phenomenon going on, but if you look at it correctly, the two assumed major participants, major talkers, they don't really spread themselves thin enough. They do not really take the time. They do not have enough energy beyond their main jobs to worry, to suffer over possibilities lost, possible missteps taken. It's like there has to be a third voice. Now, as always, if I must point out, which I will for you people on tape at other times and other places, it is not that clear cut. And I'm not trying to confuse it for you people, but it is simply not, because all of these descriptions of me talking about three voices are arbitrary. I made them up. That is, I made up the diagram, the map. I put those words and terms together to reflect something going on. And these words only reflecting the 3D phenomenon, but that should be enough to get somebody interested in this started to realize that, well, yes, once you begin to see it, that begins to explain more. But there are not three separate talks. The talk in charge of planning does not operate in some kind of vacuum. It does not operate in a separate room. It is as commingled as all of the food in your stomach, as everything that reaches the bloodstream. You cannot separate one from the other without killing the patient, without killing that which you are trying to examine. But it is a way to start looking at it. It is a way that is not available through the ordinary workings of the intellect. But these three talks, you can begin to see, furnish a kind of participant that is not normally taken in consideration. Now, the third talk, the third voice in a potential trialog, is very often lumped back in the city, back in old intelligence, under ideas of guilt, missteps, miscalculations, just the general run of what? An ordinary man's psychological life. Isn't that about it? Yeah. Look how some people seem more inclined that they can just look at something and say, well, I know how to fix that. Give me a screwdriver and a biscuit and open the hood. I can fix that. There seems to be that in life. Then there seems to be those in life that just say, my God, I'm late for my own wedding and the car won't start. What'll I do? And you've got an uncle with a beard and he will come over and just say, well, did you say that the car actually will not start? You say, yeah, what am I going to do? Has it ever not started before? Well, it's doing it again then. Once you begin to see, there is a need for another form of conversation inside of your own, heretofore referred to as dialogue. But normally people would blame it. They would say, well, if we're going to talk about that there's some kind of dialogue going in, then I guess most people, if they were following this in the city or were trying to make some sense of this, would say, well, what you're talking about is just the general area of the conscious mind working and then the unconscious mind. And there are people who consciously say that they're trying to fix something, and then unconsciously, because of the way they were mistreated as a child, because they had to eat biscuits with very little salt in them, they end up and they unconsciously want to run amok. And so they'll try to do something they say they do, and they unconsciously will always, or very often, screw it up. That's getting pretty worn. That's getting pretty worn even for you people watching it on tape that had a high school education. Not that I mind having some of you intellectual folks watch this tape. I am not anti-intellectual. Not me. As long as you don't try and repeat some philosophical truism while walking and chewing gum, I don't want you to hurt yourself. There is a need, once you begin to see it, for it to be further explained, for you to further see that there is, as it were, I'm suggesting to you, a trialogue going on. But in the same way that ordinary, or more of the same way, that ordinary people say, including psychiatrists and psychologists who apparently are the experts in the field, who say, well, you can't really be conscious of your unconscious mind, that's why it's unconscious. Or if you try and bring it up and you're unconscious, it can't operate simultaneously, it can't go on like it did with a conscious mind. In other words, they're saying, we got two minds going, but you can only be aware of one at a time. That's why we call one conscious. So, they're not going any further with this. They're stuck back there. I'm telling you that there are three, and it's not really a matter of them going in sequence or coevally. It's none of that. Oh, all right. They're all going simultaneously, but not in a linear 3D sense. It's not that all three are talking at the same time, because once you get past four-dimensional, there is no same time. It's foolish to say that, all right, three people, three voices are talking at the same time. It's just not true and it's not untrue. It has to do with the phenomenon itself, but it can't be described in 3D words. But you do have, under all ordinary conditions, the need. You can see an efficient need to pull into the picture, to pull into the schematic that there is. But it's definitely, I didn't start out, I'm pointing out to you there are 3 talks. But then I tried to slip this one up on you to get you to participate, to ask you, could you see that there's possibly going on, not a dialogue, but a trialog in one of the voices. Now, I've spent some months now with talking about the dialogue. But all of you should have your own clear, sometimes, view that's just there, that there seems to be a voice that talks about do. It's not as verbal as the other one, and it can apparently be operating on the verge always of, hey, let's do this or forget it. Because it's not big on talking about it. It's not right or wrong, but it's in charge of saying, well, let's do it. Then there is just as clearly a voice that wants to say, you mean the car won't start at all? They'll say, well, is there a mechanic nearby? Is there one in the phone book? Is there any other relative here that I don't know about that perhaps could help you? Let's see, do I know anything at all? Is there anything I could do that would be worthwhile here? There is that. It's in charge. It's not funny, even though I did it that way. It's not right or wrong, but there is a voice that you can see quite clearly. Is in charge of planning. Thinking about. And I say planning, I don't mean necessarily in some specific, scientific, detailed manner. It should be daydreaming. That is, thinking about action is what I normally call it instead of planning for action. That's why I normally call it TOA. You're just thinking of action. Because it can be either planning, but it can just be daydreaming. It can just be standing there thinking, well, this car won't start. And you can start daydreaming about all the cars that you had that wouldn't start. And that your father used to have. Isn't this a nice? I didn't know. They don't make. My father, do you remember when you had a nice and it used to, always breaking down? So it's thinking about action. It's not saying, well, open up the hood and get me a screwdriver. Give me 2 biscuits and we'll see what we can do. It just stands there and thinks about action. But there is a need to explain. Not a need for because it's already there, but there is a further need if you're going to flesh out these kind of maps. That there is another talk that goes on inside of each person, and that is the talk that seems to be worrying about the possible consequences of these other 2. Of what you're thinking about, what you're planning, what you're daydreaming about. Oh. And they're going to say, well, I'm about to do so-and-so. Oh, ooh, Could anybody picture a nice, interesting dance? Not of 3 people that operate linearly like ballet dancers, but like ballroom dancing, but you got 3 people. But you got to picture now gracefully. Not looking at it like it was a mutant happening, like an anomaly, but 3 people actually, however they would do it, one person and then the other one, and all 3, and they are dancing. How does that sound? Besides weird, unusual, alien. Now you don't know that. Now in a new world, in new lands, remember, you could see creatures that would look like a combination between a French horn player and silly putty. An insurance salesman and yesterday's newspaper. So you don't know. You cannot say that there could not be 3 people dancing. You could not say with any certainty, looking at it with 2 eyes, that there are not 3 people dancing in you. There are definitely 3 voices talking. I don't see how any of you can be capable of escaping the beginning of tonight. That there are 3 voices and they talk right from the body itself. That is, as opposed to any imaginary dream that psychologically I've got some kind of life and I have pulled it somewhere that's beyond the body. It's transphysical. I got it from my environment. I got it from my mother, not genetically. No. I got it from my mother's attitude. I got it from my mother's, the way she felt, the way she talked. I got it somewhere that's different from the warts I got and from my big earlobes. It's different from that. The system itself has 3 talks. Humanity has 3 talks. Each individual has 3 talks, and it is not linearly and it is not simultaneously. It's the end of all confusion once you see it, because there's nothing confusing anymore about it. It is 3 people dancing. I mean, dancing in such a way that would make Fred stare if he had 3 eyes, look at it and go, shh. He'd take his shoes off and throw them away. Ginger Rogers would hold her breath and go, ugh. Because then you understand it's beginning to make sense. Either that or look a lot like Christmas. No. But because what? Imagine. Well, let me try it real quick. My mother was frightened by a fake book, for you people. Forget all that. So I was trying to keep you people that might be concerned to not get involved in my little musical side jokes. Think about this right quick. That if indeed I am describing something to you, that all affairs, all reality is resting not on turtles, on top of turtles, but on 3 people. They're dancing together. Together. Not on the same stage, but like ballroom dancing. They're all 3 intertwined. They're clutching. And all 3. No jealousy. Nobody stepping on anybody's foot. It is precision. But now, imagine that is going on, and all you can see is 2 of them. Think about it a second. Come on. And I'm telling you there are 3 going on. There are more than that, but I'm trying to be decent. There are 3 going on, and all you see, you and everybody else, all you see is 2. Think about it a second. You understand that these 2 are constantly doing stuff, and you look at it, and something's wrong. Things don't go where they apparently you thought they'd go. Maybe you and a whole lot of other people go, oh, faux pas, faux pas. It looks clumsy. It looks like that they're fighting against each other. Imagine that what you're seeing is only 2/3 of it. Try and picture right quick that there's 3 and they're dancing through all kinds of intricate moves, and of course not just 3-dimensionally, but up in the air and floating around, moving in all possible directions, but all you see is 2 of them. Can you just get a glimpse, somewhere a fleeting glimpse, of how this could be a verbal description of what seems to be the inability of the human intellect to make sense of what goes on? Of why there seems to be the unexpected always occurring, the untoward, the clumsy, that plans do not seem to match actions. That seems as though one of the dancers is almost saying, now if you can combine dancing with talking, just like one of the dancers you can tell is sending out verbal or otherwise signals that, hey, let's do so and so, and then apparently they did just the opposite. How could a religion turn into a court of inquisition? How could a man run as a rebel to free his country, and as soon as he run off the dictator, prove to be worse? How can people take a small child and say you love Daddy? Say it, damn it. How can this go on in life when you're seeing only 2 dancers? And there are 3. How is it that internally you can apparently make so many plans, or at least daydreams, think about so much action, then do either, there's a whole bunch of possibilities verbally, either do so little, or dream so much and then do it and it always goes awry, or to dream so much and then every time you go ahead and decide to do something, it's like you hadn't even thought about it. Well, I'd planned to do so and so and I just went out and did something else. All of that, and then neither one of those 2 voices seems to ever suffer over it. You suffer, but if they actually were suffering, that is, if they could actually learn from it, why don't either one of those, like the voice in charge of doing, by the time you were what? 12, 13, all right, 21. Give yourself a break. How come the voice that does, in charge of action, how come it didn't finally say, wait a minute, now I'm not going through with any more of these plans of yours, until I know that they're well thought out and have some promise of success. And now having 14 or 21 years, I got news for you. I can tell most of them when you hadn't thought it out. Why doesn't that voice ever do that with anybody? Never. Or, conversely, as is possible in the city, but not up. But at any rate, it has its own atmospheric problems there. Gravity is spelled a different way. And you don't hear about it, believe me. But then the one in charge of planning, the voice in charge of planning, after all these years, be it 14, 21, or even 22 if you want to push it. All right, 40. Those of you that old. How come the voice in charge of planning finally didn't say, look, I've been in here, I've been trying to help you for 40 years now. I plan, and then something happens. I have good plans, or at least I think about, and they sound good to me, and nothing ever works. We got to do something about this. In other words, what seems to be the human suffering over failure in action, failure to take action, the kind of apparent stress of the ambiguities of modern life and ancient life, that all of those would seem to have changed one of the voices if one of the voices, or both of them, were the ones actually so suffering, or so manifesting about how can we continue to run amok. Doesn't it strike you, now that I pointed out, that funny that it's like those two voices talk about, take the dance steps that they've always done over and over and over and over and over. And it's not simple. It's not going to explain anything to say, well, humanity is stupid. Or to make a joke and say, well, people don't learn from their mistakes. It's not a matter of live and learn. Just live and just keep on living. Nothing happens. That doesn't explain anything unless you're a cynic. Unless you're going to stay as the critic on life's favor and go, yeah. And then, you know, I guess you say to yourself, boy, that explains a lot. As long as I can laugh and be a wise ass, yeah. You follow what I'm saying? That should strike somebody finally that, wait a minute, these two voices, the part that seems to be a dialogue, and one of them talks about plans, just daydreams, and they're satisfied. But you can't live like that. You can't sit around and just look at pictures of food. You got to finally get up and go eat. And then there seems to be a voice that goes, well, you know, I ain't going to drive across town to go get some kind of quiche that you just read about. You know, there's a peanut butter sandwich in the icebox. I'm going to go get it. And it goes and gets it. All right, it would seem that one of those voices, or both, after all these years, would have made some shift in what it does, that is either action or thinking of action, that would stop this kind of suffering, this kind of guilt, this kind of feeling that I am misusing my talents, I'm misusing my life. But what if it's neither one of them has any degree of suffering, and I'm using suffering in the widest sense, that none of them are disquieted by what happens. They're not disturbed. That there's another one in there that's in charge of that. And so the other two never have to change what they do. They can't change it. But notice it would not be necessarily efficient from one view were they having to suffer, because it would take out time then for what they do, whether it be doing something, taking action, or thinking of action. It's like having a third one that no matter what happens, whether the action gets done, whether it doesn't get done, whether it gets attempted and fails, whether it gets attempted and just partially succeeds, which is all you can get in life anyway. But there's always apparently some kind of voice that's always there going, well. I didn't want to be crude. I called it the limbic voice. I hate to call it the whining voice, but well, I knew it, or boy, I figured that. Well, why waste your time? Remember what happened last time. And it's as though the doing it voice doesn't remember what happened last time. It's as though, don't worry about literal, but it's as though it didn't. Because what I was trying to get you to see, if it did remember, it would say, wait a minute, I'm not going to jump off the deep end again. Or I'm not going to listen to these half-baked plans. But it's as though each day is brand new. That the doing it voice goes, well, all right, let's do it. And it's as though you say, well, wait a minute. You're about, I see what you're doing. You're about to eat another one of those $27 pizzas you buy down the street. And every time you do it, you can hardly sleep. And it's like the doing it voice goes, what? What? It's like it doesn't hear it. And yet inside of you is some kind of voice that goes, oh, no, not again. And it goes ahead and does it. But it's as though it never pays the price. Or they're thinking about it. They're thinking of action voice. It's as though it never pays the price of not having its actions carried out, of not being able to fulfill its dreams, of sitting around dreaming of whatever, being famous, some kind of sexual daydreams, some kind of daydreams where I should have said, I will say. And it doesn't. It can't get the doing it voice to do it, apparently. But does it learn from it? Like, well, I'm just going to quit talking about it. Well, you know, why drive myself crazy? I don't ever do it. But it's as though every day it forgets that I never do it. But hell, I'll daydream again that, boy, if I had the nerve to dress up like Carmen Miranda and go down and hang around the train station, move up from the bus station. And you never do it. But you would think, well, wait a minute. Am I going to drive myself crazy? Goddamn, go ahead and put some bananas on your hair and, you know, steal your sister's dress and go do it. But it's as though, it's almost as though that the thinking about action voice had never thought about it like he just did today. And yet there is something in people that if it's pointed out or from certain views, they are aware of it, that this is not the first time I thought about that. But you would think from a certain view that the thinking of action voice would finally go, I give up. I'm not going to do it, so why drive myself crazy? Figure of speech. But it doesn't. Because I'm suggesting to you that it's not really the voice, it's not really the dancing partner either, that in any way is disturbed by the way things go or don't go. I hate to quote myself, but if all this were a valid new territory map, wouldn't that explain a lot? Of course, we explain a lot and you see it, then it no longer needs explaining. That's the end of it. But you can't even say it explained a lot. It explained what it explained. But I'm using a figure of speech. Wouldn't that explain a lot? All right? I'll define a lot. Would you consider a lot to quit suffering? Would most people consider that a lot, or a small lot, maybe just half acre more or less, but a small lot. Well, that's better than a joke that didn't. As soon as I said that about a small lot, and somebody say, well, you're a small lot, and you say, yeah, but at least I didn't turn that into a pillow of stone. Salt. We're going to sit at the end of the public tape. I'm going to run a small excursion. We're back rolling. You people in the groups everywhere and here, I want you to do something. Forget any of you who are going to say that this is a variation that I've done before. I know that, but just do it. Just trust me. Let's take 4 days, starting from wherever you hear this tape and the rest of you tonight, and see if you can get, just use like a 4-day reconnaissance tour, and see if you can get any kind, figuratively speaking, a feel. I tell you not to say that word, and I oftentimes do not say it myself. A feel is really, in a sense, that people in the city use it, and even a more complex, is a feel is a thought that you're not sure of. But see if you can get a feel. See if you can get an intellectual hint, an intellectual suspicion of any sort of percentage in you as to the operations of these 3 kinds of talk. Especially silently. That is, not your talk to other people, which is all right to include that, but just try and see over 4 days, just reconnoitering. And remember, a good revolutionist, you remember this, finds a place to gather information, to reconnoiter, and not give away any. Remember? So you just got to get inside and kind of lay low, which means don't get tied up with the activities themselves, and just watch and see if you get any kind of intellectual feel of some sort of pattern that you seem to, by and large, be talking through, or vice versa, of course, the talk through you being ma, or ma, or the ma. That is the motor, the limbic, or the cortical. More than one? Just see if you get some sort of, if not strong intellectual suspicion, perhaps even an insight. See what kind of information you can pick up. And you could do this. At the end of the 4th day, any information that you have collected in the privacy of your own nervous system is then look at that information. You can pretend that you wrote it down, like, well, I seem to talk, that is, the talk seems to talk me through motor kind of talk, blah, 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 and limbic, blah, blah, blah. Take a look at the information, and then I would suggest at least you might find another, or synonymize one of these. But look at the information that you might gather and either go, or wow, or is this a joke? That's 3 of the more popular ones in certain areas of the universe.